Welcome to Bankruptcy, Through the Looking Glass, with Barry Levine.
Welcome to Bankruptcy Through the Looking Glass, with Barry Levine. Today, we're talking about Bitcoin and bankruptcy, how crypto is changing the game. I'm your host, Abigail Vaca. Welcome, Barry.
Hi, Abigail. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So let's jump right in.
Sure.
How does Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies impact bankruptcy proceedings compared to traditional assets?
Well, from my perspective, an asset is an asset. I mean, it's just different characterization for a debtor's asset. You would be listing the Bitcoin, how many Bitcoin you have and what its value is. And then if you could exempt it, it would really be no different. It's whether ultimately someone could get your Bitcoin, but that's another story. They're considered, from a trustee's point of view nowadays, because a lot of people have Bitcoin. Years ago, trustees, when you go to a 341 meeting, when the trustee questions the debtor, and the debtor fills out their schedules. Very often the people have Bitcoin now. There are a lot of come-ons with these Bitcoin banks and stuff where you get a free one and this, that, and the other thing. So you list it. The thing about the Bitcoin is, and to me, I've always thought of Bitcoin as like Cabbage Patch dolls or Swatch watches. It's like air. I have no idea what it is. Tomorrow it could be worthless. The next day it could be worth thousands. But the real practical problem is getting into the Bitcoin is stored, from what I understand, in a wallet. And you need the key to get into the Bitcoin wallet. And very often you may have seen situations or read about them, where somebody has forgotten the key and you have like 5 chances to get into the wallet. And I once had a gentleman consult with me who, this is several years ago, he read about how Bitcoin was going up in value. And this is when Bitcoin was just maybe $10,000 a Bitcoin. And he decided he had money in his 401k and he decided to take money out. He wasn't old enough to take it out without penalty or anything like that. But he knew that if he puts the money back in a year, no harm, no foul. Well, he bought $750,000 worth of Bitcoin and he forgot the key to his wallet. And he was looking at a situation where he couldn't pay back his 401k, which would result in what accountants call a taxable event, because you pay penalties on it, you pay income on it when you take it out beforehand. And when he had come to me, he had consulted, there are people out there who actually, if you want to pay them, will try to recover your key. First, they charge like several hundreds of thousands of dollars and don't guarantee that they're going to be able to accomplish what they set out to do. And then you only have a certain number of times to futz around with it before you're locked out completely. And interestingly, I know I've spoken on a few other these podcasts about it. I have a client now who is in bankruptcy, and he has over 1,807 Bitcoin to be exact. But because he can't access them, on paper he's worth $180 million, but he's in a Chapter 7. How it came about, I happen to, I've been saying this is probably going to be a movie someday. It goes back over a decade. He was at, I don't remember, he told me it was a Hanukkah party or something like that with his brother. They got loaded. They decided his brother convinced him to buy Bitcoin, and he bought some ridiculous amount of Bitcoin. And his wife, who's a very nice lady, but she's a native of Greece, and, like Greek wives, Jewish wives, Italian wives, she found out about the Bitcoin purchase the next day, and he sold back the Bitcoin a day later. The story goes on to say a year later, same thing, another holiday party, he bought more Bitcoin. And with that, this time, he forgot the key to get into the wallet. Didn't think anything about it. In the middle of this whole thing, it's a very good story. In the middle of the whole thing, he's like a developer. He builds out buildings and this, that, and the other thing. He was going into partnership with somebody. They were setting up an LLC to do this real estate investing. And it didn't go through, but his investor partner ran through about $33 million worth of money in my client's name using the LLC they set up. And what then occurred is he was involved in a identity theft case, and the gentleman who was his erstwhile partner sitting in jail someplace. And again, getting back to the Bitcoin, thought nothing of it. He had somebody come in to look at his computers, one of these computer guys who do things that you need on them. And the guy, when he was done checking out his computer, he said to him, "Have you ever dealt with Bitcoin?" And my client said, yeah, like I said, the first time was 2010. Didn't say anything more. The guy came back again, and then it came to pass that he discovered on his laptop, whatever computer he was working, that there was the guy who stole his identity, evidently liked to trade in Bitcoin. There were 1,807 Bitcoin on his computer. The gentleman who was working on his computer now holds the Bitcoin as the quote unquote custodian and refuses to turn them over. My client and his wife, they were in business together. She had a medical issue. She couldn't work anymore, so their partnership could no longer operate. And he wound up, how did he file bankruptcy with $180 million worth of Bitcoin? He wound up in arrears on his mortgage. Having the Bitcoin wasn't like being able to do anything with it because this guy was holding it. So he had to file a bankruptcy to stop a foreclosure. And where we sit now is he's in a Chapter 7. He only has $5 million worth of debt and $180 million worth of Bitcoin. The various parties are trying to recover the Bitcoin from the gentleman who's holding it. I guess ultimately you don't have a lot of recourse to do anything in a situation like that. But it makes for a good story.
Great story. And it sounds super complicated. So that leaves me with a couple follow-up questions.
Sure.
Are cryptocurrencies considered property or currency in bankruptcy cases? And why would that distinction matter? And what challenges do bankruptcy courts face when dealing with crypto assets, especially in valuation and disclosure?
Well, I don't look at it as any different from any other asset. It's a question of when you file a bankruptcy, if you own Bitcoin, you should list it. And Bitcoin, there are a lot of other problems, such as converting your Bitcoin into cash. But, Bitcoin, like stock, has a daily value. And, that's what you would put down in your bankruptcy petition. And that's how it would be treated. When you file a bankruptcy, you're entitled to certain exemptions. Of course, my client with $180 million worth of Bitcoin, he wouldn't, there's more Bitcoin than debt, but, the exemption wouldn't cover that. But, most people, if they're yourself, myself, you have maybe $5,000 or $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, you should be able to exempt something like that. It becomes a problem when you have assets that are beyond your exemptions. Then you may want to look at some pre-bankruptcy planning before you put at risk Bitcoin. But like I said, from what I understand, before this gentleman became my client, I only knew about Bitcoin what I read, and it gives me a headache. I've learned more than I really care to know about it, but it's not that easy. I understand now, if you wanted to pay somebody in Bitcoin, you can go to there's an app, there's a kiosk or something, and you can put $20 into it or whatever, and you can pay somebody $20, which is probably 0.0001 Bitcoin, but you can do that. From what I understand, is the real problem is the other way around, is trying to liquidate your Bitcoin. You can't necessarily go to a bank. It's not necessarily currency that's, recognized as such, though. What's his name? Oh, excuse me. Our current president is trying to do something about Bitcoin to, make it more recognizable. On the other hand, he'll probably continue to sell his Trump coins. So, why not? The value goes up. But, I think it's more a question of whether it's something you can, put your hands on. It doesn't exist. It's not like a dollar or a dollar in the bank that if you go bankrupt, the trustee can just liquidate it and creates the cash. Even stocks, a trustee can liquidate stocks and turn it into cash. Bitcoin, from what is so far, I don't know if there are a lot of cases about it. Not that I've encountered, because we haven't reached the point where we have the Bitcoin yet. But I think most within the limits of the exemption, so the issue doesn't really arise of liquidating it.
So then how do trustees track and recover Bitcoin holdings in bankruptcy cases, given the anonymous nature of crypto transactions? Can individuals protect their Bitcoin from being seized in bankruptcy? And if so, what legal strategies exist?
The thing is, I look at Bitcoin like any other asset. Like this client with the Bitcoin, before we finally filed a Chapter 7 for him to stop a foreclosure, almost 8 months before, I didn't represent him then, filed a Chapter 13 to stop the same foreclosure. And at the time, he was the owner of the Bitcoin, and hindsight being 2020, I still don't understand why more wasn't made of the fact that the guy had over $100 million, and maybe somebody should be trying to recover it. But, like any other asset, unless you're going to commit bankruptcy fraud, that's between you and whoever. The only thing, like I think I've said before, like the guy who once came to me and said, do I have to tell you about the property I own in Maine? Well, it's like, schmuck, now you do. It's no different from any other asset. Very often the wallet, I wish I knew the names of these companies they're like big conglomerate companies that maintain wallets for people. If I own Bitcoin, my Bitcoin wallet is in this place or in this place. And it has a wallet address. And if the trustee would ask for it, you would easily, long general, string of numbers like pi to the nth degree. But you could give the trustee the wallet address and go from there. But again, like any other asset, it comes down to, is it exempt or not? If it's exempt, the trustee may still ask to see a statement. Okay, because just because you say it's worth $5,000 doesn't mean it's really worth $5,000. It's like when client owns real estate, we get an appraisal. So here's what the place is worth. So you may ask for the statement, but if it's exempt, they don't bat an eyelash. I mean, they're not looking to liquidate debtors' assets just to be, an asshole, for lack of a better word. There's no money in it, too. I mean, what would $5,000 worth of Bitcoin bring in, whether you're going to sell it and have to get somebody to sell it, do the work to sell it? It's just not worth it.
What happens if someone fails to disclose their Bitcoin holdings during bankruptcy? And what are the legal consequences? Did
I say bankruptcy fraud before? I mean, if it comes to light, then it depends, and I'm an inveterate cynic and I hate the government, but it depends on how anybody is going to react to it. If you forgot to list $5,000 worth of Bitcoin and oops, I've been found out, and you reopen your case and you amend it to show that, and it's an exempt asset, okay, that may pass muster. On the other hand, if you intentionally left it out, it's another issue. It's something you don't want to get into. Or you have to hope nobody ever finds out, which is also, the reality is that, is somebody looking? I mean, I don't want to give anybody any suggestions, but, nobody, it's like the other example I give is when people have a business and they're withholding employees' money and, withholding, and the business is having trouble. Well, the easiest loan to take is the employee withholding that they're taking. Nobody's standing there with a gun saying you have to pay it to the IRS. And that, of course, leads to other problems, but that's a story for another day.
That's great. And let's wrap up by talking about how have recent court rulings shaped the way that Bitcoin is treated in bankruptcy cases?
It's really a new issue. I happen to think that the case I have, the interesting part of the case is there are people out there who say they can recover the Bitcoin. They want to, for the privilege of doing it, they want more money than would be in the debtor's estate. So if you look at the case, his creditors are $5 million. His equity in the Bitcoin is, pick a number, $175 million. So, it's not normally a case with assets is one where the debtor should have no say in the matter. The creditors aren't going to be paid 100 cents on the dollar. And when I say $5 million, that's probably by being generous by $1.5 million, unless legal fees take it up, that could be. Not me, of course, but somebody else. But the thing is, it's like anything else. Bitcoin. It's the courts have really, it's a new issue. Now recently, it's probably within the last 6 months that trustees have started asking debtors if they own any Bitcoin. Before that, it was never broached. And now, like I said, if they own Bitcoin, it should be listed on their petition. And, if they don't want to tell anybody, they don't want to tell anybody. But, I don't know whether there's no real strategy around it. It would be like any other asset. You would be trying to make yourself judgment proof somehow. But I really don't know whether, every wallet that exists is a wallet that's listed someplace, whether if you're computer savvy, which it's not me, you can possibly set up a wallet for your Bitcoin to stash it in that nobody knows about. But that's, I have a nephew who has a master's in computer science. Maybe ask him. I have no clue.
That makes two of us. Well, thank you for joining us today. This has been a pleasure.
Same here. And you haven't been here before, I usually say sei gesund, which is Yiddish for be healthy.
And thank you for joining us for Bitcoin and Bankruptcy, how crypto is changing the game. To connect with Barry, visit levineslaw.com. Please subscribe, like, and leave us a review.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.